All right, so my name is David Helms, and I'm with a company called Radius Networks. We're actually here local in DC. Our offices are in Georgetown. And we make iBeacons. We make the tools that allow you to develop solutions that are proximity aware and that leverage iBeacon technology. So we actually have in our office a guy named Sean. He's our designer. And so let's just pretend Sean's got a new project. And Sean's a little vexed. I don't know if you could see the stress on Sean's face, right? But the problem for Sean is that he's kind of in a funk. And that's because, let's face it, when you're doing mobile design, that little rectangle where you're doing all of that, you try to cram all this good stuff in that little space, it's a little limiting. So maybe like Sean, you're feeling a little trapped. So the answer to this problem is simple. Get out from behind the glass. That's my big tagline. It's awesome. You're going to see it on billboards soon. And how are we going to get out from behind the glass? So we're going to design some proximity-aware mobile apps using iBeacons. We're going to stretch out. We're going to touch the things around the phone and not be confined to designing experiences within the phone. All right, so what is a proximity-aware mobile app? So it is a mobile app that essentially implements behaviors when the device is near some place that's significant or important or relevant to the user. So when I say implement behaviors, what I mean is it presents content, or maybe it executes a procedure. So maybe it switches to a point in the app, deep linking into the app, or maybe it sends a message to a cloud service, but it executes some procedure when it's near a place or thing. And so the trick is, how does it know when it's near that place or that thing, right? We've got geofencing. I think a lot of us went crazy over the last couple of years building geofence-enabled apps. And I think we all realized, I don't know, if you have the Starbucks app and you're getting your Starbucks card come up every time you're 4 blocks away from the Starbucks and you go, oh yeah, that again. Okay, that's not the effect we're trying to achieve, right? And so geofencing does give you proximity awareness, but it does not give you fine-grained micro-location. What can give you that is iBeacons. So what is an iBeacon? So an iBeacon is a Bluetooth version 4.0 transmitter. The Bluetooth SIG has a little problem with their naming. So there's Bluetooth version 4.0. There is Bluetooth Low Energy, you may have heard. You also may have heard of Bluetooth Smart. It's a little schizophrenic over there, but those are all the same thing, okay? So whenever you hear those different terms, they're just, and the Bluetooth SIG now wants to use Bluetooth Smart, which of course is the least informative name of the bunch. All right, so iBeacons are based on a technical specification developed by Apple. So Apple doesn't own Bluetooth, low energy. All they did is they took off the shelf and designed essentially a messaging format for these Bluetooth transmitters so that when an iPhone or an iPad, any iOS device that has Bluetooth 4.0 capabilities, when it encounters that message, it recognizes that that is an iBeacon, a proximity beacon using the iBeacon specification, right? So what are iBeacons used for? Essentially use them to mark places or things. So think about tagging a place with one of these beacons, and then as individuals walk by with their phones can recognize, oh, I'm close to this, I see a beacon, I'm close to it, I'm within its transmission range, right? So compatible mobile devices can uniquely identify the beacon based on the information it's sending, and they can determine their proximity or approximate distance from the beacon. And that's measured on the order of half a meter type of accuracy. So we're not talking about city blocks now. We're talking as far away as 40 meters if we have a fairly strong beacon. So 25 to 40 meters total range when you encounter the beacon for the first time, and then a knowledge of your distance from that beacon as close as half a meter. So that gives you, relatively flexible far range knowledge. Oh, I'm approaching something interesting, as well as almost all the way down to near field, touching the device. And so that spectrum of awareness that you are near one of these devices and that where you are in that radius or that distance from those devices. Gives a lot of different application flexibility. All right, so what kind of information does an iBeacon transmit? So iBeacon transmissions are repeated. They are the same transmission over and over and over again. So you can just think of them as simple lighthouses, just flashing all the time. And there are some misperceptions that iBeacons are delivering contents. We get folks call us all the time. I have a store. I want users to walk by with their phone and to get an ad from me or an offer from me. iBeacons don't provide ads or offers. iBeacons just transmit an advertisement repeatedly over and over and over again. And that advertisement has two information components in it. One is the identifier of that beacon, and the second component is something called the measured power value, right? So the identifier is essentially the identity of that beacon. So now when that iPhone or that Android device encounters the beacon, it can say, oh, I see its unique number. Now, that has to be meaningful to the app. The app then decides what that means. What is the context? Well, it's whatever that means to that app, right? So that identifier is actually made up of three components. One is the UUID. If you're not familiar with UUIDs, they're universal unique identifiers. It's just a standard specification for a 16-byte value. And in this case, it's roughly equivalent to the organization ID. What organization owns this beacon? The second identifier or subcomponent of the identifier is the major. Kind of odd, you can tell software guys made up these names, right? The major, which you can think of as a group identifier, and that's a 2-byte value. Okay. So something about the UUID. The UUID is 16 bytes. It's such a large number that it has it's almost collision proof. So you don't have to register your UUID. Nobody hands you out a UUID. You just create a UUID in the standard way, and it's almost mathematically guaranteed to be unique. So ad hoc, anyone can create your own UUID and identify their organization. Okay. The major being 2 bytes or 16 bits gives you 65,000 combinations. So you can have 65,000 groups within that organization identified by the UUID. And then the minor is the unit ID. So the individual beacon within a group, within an organization. And the minor is also a 2-byte value, so that's 16 bits. So that's 65,000 units within 65,000 groups within a huge, almost collision-proof organizational ID. There's no limit on the number of UUIDs you can have. So if you have a need to have multiple UUIDs, you can create as many as you want. Okay, so that's the identifier. And so now you're really smart when anyone talks about UUID, major, minor, you've got that down. Okay, the other important piece of information that gets sent along with the identifier is this thing called the measured power value. And what the measured power value is when a beacon is deployed, right, it's going to have its own unique device characteristics. We have being passed around here 2 different flavors of beacons. One's battery powered, one's USB powered. They're completely different devices. So they're going to have certain power transmission characteristics, right? But then on top of that, when you deploy them, one might be underneath this counter, okay, behind some glass, right? Behind an aquarium. Who knows what it's going to be around, right? So you actually need to calibrate these beacons in situ or in place. Right? And so what you want to do is you want to measure 1 meter away, and you do that by taking an iPhone, specifically an iPhone 5S, and you measure through a calibration process, which we won't go into the details today, but essentially what you come up with is, what is the signal strength that I receive 1 meter away? And then you configure that into the beacon to tell it, when you advertise, this is the measured power value you should send. Why is that important? Because when my phone encounters the beacon, at runtime, if you will, right? It's not going to be 1 meter away. It might be 10 meters away, or it might be half a meter away. But it's going to be getting some live signal strength value. It can measure the signal strength. By comparing that to the 1 meter calibration value, then it can determine, oh, I'm about 10 meters away. So you're comparing against a reference value, what the current live signal strength is, running that through a little fancy calculation and saying, okay, I'm about 15 meters away, or oh, I'm about 10 meters away, oh, I'm about half a meter away. And so that's how the phones determine their distance. And remember, you don't get direction, you only get distance. Yeah?
So can you turn it off? Like, I know you can turn Bluetooth off, but, and so iBeacon is completely optional.
Okay, so the question is, can you turn, is iBeacon optional for the user? So we'll just dive into that right now. All right, no, that's great. So with iBeacon, you must have an application that is iBeacon aware, okay? Because it's the job of the application to tell the operating system, these are the beacons I am interested in when you encounter them, based on the UUID or based on the UUID and the major, or even all the way down to the UUID major and minor. You can say, I only want to know about this one beacon. Right, but you have this hierarchy, and you could say, tell me about all the beacons that have at least this UUID, right? So why is that important? Well, first, you got to have an app as part of the solution. That's cool. We make apps. No problem there, right? It also gives the user control, right? The user can say, hey, I'm interested in what Nordstrom has to tell me on my phone. Okay, so I can install the Nordstrom app. But maybe they still don't want to do iBeacon. They have the Nordstrom's app. So when that Nordstrom app gets installed, right, it'll say the Nordstrom app would like to have your location data. If they say yes, okay, you're in the next step along. Okay, but you still haven't fully committed to iBeacon yet because you must also have Bluetooth turned on. So you have the user has multiple levels at which they can tune their experience. Now as designers, that's a little painful for us because we want everybody to participate in this awesome thing that we're designing, right? But in fact, in the long run, as this technology gets adopted, it's actually really important for the success of it that we leave the control in the user's hands. They don't feel like they're being surveilled, and they have the ability to turn things on and off as they realize it is delivering value and service to them that they appreciate. Okay.
Yeah. Two other questions. So the first is, if you don't have any iBeacon-aware apps on your iPhone, even if you have iOS 7 installed, it will never do anything, right? With the iBeacons?
So the question is, if you don't have any iBeacon-aware apps, will your phone ever do anything when it encounters an iBeacon? And the answer is almost 99% no. The only exception to that is that in iOS there is one app that comes pre-iBeacon aware, pre-enabled iBeacon aware, and that's Passkit, or the Passbook app rather. And in that case, if you download a pass that specifies an iBeacon that pass is interested in, the Passbook app will go ahead and implement that. So it depends on whether you think Passbook is part of the operating system or not, but basically that's the only thing that comes with iOS that's sort of iBeacon ready to go for the user.
Yeah. Don't you have to have notifications enabled for that app as well to have it work, or not?
The question is, do you need to have notifications enabled for it to work? Only if the behavior that's being implemented is a notification. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of focus in and make sure we get through the majority of this, and we have plenty of time for questions at the end. All right, so we already have touched on this first bullet, which you must have an app installed that is iBeacon aware in order to play it all, right? So then what is the phone's interaction with the beacon? So you have two major events that you can monitor for. One is the inter-region event, here, and then one is the exit region event, here. So hopefully the diagram and the name is kind of self-explanatory. When the phone encounters the signal, that's the inter-region. The first time it hears it, that's an inter-region. Then as you traverse the region covered by the signal, right, you're not going to get an exit region event until you have exited the range of the signal and a timeout has occurred, which on an iPhone 5S is about 40 seconds. So about 40 seconds after you no longer hear the signal anymore, then you will get an exit region event. Okay. So on top of monitoring events, which generate those two events, you also have ranging events, which is if the app is, and this is a technical term, ranging as well as monitoring, then what the app is asking for is that while I'm in region, update me on my location or my distance from the beacon. And what you'll get is a delegate callback to the app once a second about that will inform you, will hand the app back an array of beacons that are visible in the region and your distance from those beacons, right? Now, it organizes the distance in two ways. One way, it has these proximity zones. And you think of those proximity zones as either immediate, which is within half a meter of the beacon, or near, which is half a meter to 2 meters, or far, which is beyond 2 meters, but I can still hear the signal, right? And as designers, we should focus our solutions around proximity as how we determine how close we are. If we're trying to do very, very precise distance, then the natural fluctuation in the signal strength due to the behaviors of the transmitter itself, or based on just the environment, people walk in front of the device, all kinds of things that can affect the signal strength, right? You're going to end up with a very flappy solution if it's depending on precise distance like that. So you really want to be focused on the proximity zones as where you implement the different behaviors that you have, right? And then really the distance numbers that you get back, and Apple calls that accuracy, really should only be compared, like when you have to bake off between multiple beacons that are in the same zone, when you get that ranging call back, then you can use the distance number to vote between which one you really think you're closest to. Okay, so as designers, let's not fall into the trap of saying, I'm going to do something when it's exactly 8 meters away, okay? Because that has a high likelihood, it's very fragile. So you want to really focus on these zones to give you a more robust solution. Okay, so what mobile devices are compatible with iBeacons? So you have iOS devices, really any device from Apple that has Bluetooth 4.0 capability. So if we just look at iPhones, that's iPhone 4S and above, or iPad 3 and above, and I don't know, some iPod touches in there somewhere, I don't know which one's there. You also must have iOS 7 or higher, okay? On Android, what you need is Android 4.3 and higher, obviously devices with Bluetooth 4.0 support, and in the last 6 months, that number is getting much, much bigger, right? And then you're going to need a third-party iBeacon support library. Similar to the one that we provide an open source version, and then we also provide our pro version, something called Proximity Kit. Okay, but Android doesn't come with iBeacon awareness built into the operating system. You have to bring that along with you in the SDK that you use, right? All right, so what's the deal with Radius Networks? What do we do? So we provide essentially the tools and the technologies to help designers and app developers build these solutions. We don't build end user solutions. We provide platforms and tools for folks like you. So that encompasses Proximity Kit, which is our cloud service for managing and organizing beacons, as well as the mobile SDKs, which are tied into those cloud services for synchronization capability that go into iOS or into Android. We also provide developer tools for emulating beacons in software and also for scanning and discovering beacons. And currently those operate on the Mac platform, so you can actually emulate beacons, have your own little beacon library right on your Mac, and also on iOS and Android. And then lastly, we make beacons themselves. And as I said, there's a couple floating around here. I see a couple stalled out, so let's keep them moving. People want to check them out. And so now we're going to talk about making an app. So how do I make an app using Proximity Kit? And I'm not doing any code here. If anyone wants to talk code, we can do that afterwards. So stepwise, you can create a free developer account at proximitykit.com. Then once you have your account, you can create a kit. So a kit is just a container, and populate it with beacon instances. So define beacons in the way we discussed. What is the UUID? What is the major? What is the minor? How are they organized underneath UUID, which is organization, inside groups? So you create all of those beacon instances. And then download the iOS or the Android SDK along with the config file for that kit that relates to that information you've created. And there's some graphics on how to do that. So once you've downloaded the iOS SDK and the config file for your kit, then just include them in your project. So we're just showing Xcode here, but you could use the Android development environment as well. Integrate your delegate methods in your app. So those callbacks for when you encounter a beacon, we talked about monitoring and ranging. You want to hook them into the behaviors that you want to implement. So I want to update a web view, for example, or I want to bring up a notification, or I want to, I don't know, play a song. What the app can do. And the beauties of iBeacon is its simplicity. You're just getting a trigger, and then the app is free to do anything that it wants. That's what makes it so powerful, is that any behavior that you want to implement, you can do on the phone, just based on what state the app is in. Now, if you are interested in building one of these, there's a simple tutorial available on YouTube. There's a bit.ly link here, so as this thing gets out, as these guys send out the presentation, you can use that. But if you just want to go to YouTube, you can also just search for Proximity Kit, and it'll be the top on the list. And that tutorial will show you how to essentially populate web views as you encounter different beacons. All right, and so if we bring it all together, what's going to happen? So you're going to configure your iBeacons in the web portal, and there's also an API if you want to do a cloud-to-cloud type integration for this. But you create your beacon instances in the cloud, and then the SDK in your app on the mobile device will sync with the cloud. The beauty of this is as you make add moves and changes, you start out with 10 beacons, it's no big deal. It starts to be 100 beacons, it starts to be 1,000 beacons. If you're talking about McDonald's and Burger King, you're talking about 100,000 beacons eventually, right? That doesn't really scale so well in terms of every time you add a beacon or you open a new store, you've got to rev the app. You don't want to be doing that stuff, right? So, all your adds, moves, and changes for beacons just get synced in the background to the phones, and you might have 10 phones, but you also might have 1 million phones, and that all scales and takes care of that. Also, when you're building those beacon instances in the cloud, you also can attach metadata. You can attach arbitrary key value pairs. So when we talked about the callbacks that you get with monitoring and ranging, the enter events, the exit events, all those types of things. Not only can you get that basic beacon information, but with our system you also get that whole key value pair dictionary. So you can say, when I encounter this beacon, I'm also going to have a key called URL. And then the value attached to that key is going to be the URL that I pull content from when the user has encountered this beacon. So it allows you to attach meaningful metadata to the beacon so that when your app encounters it, it's driven by what you put up in the cloud. Okay, so then when the device monitors for the iBeacons, awesome things happen when you encounter them. All right, well, how do you built all this, how do you test it? So that's why we focus on tools as well. So we've learned a lot of life lessons as we've fielded these solutions, and then we've turned them into tools for you guys. So one tool is called Locate for iBeacon. It is bar none the most downloaded iBeacon related app on the iOS App Store. Well over 40,000 downloads now. And so you can use that to discover beacons. You can also use it to emulate beacons. And then we've also given people the option to crowdsource the beacons that they have observed. And so last week, I don't have on the slides here, but there's something called wikibeacon.org. And if you go take a look at that, you're going to see about 35,000 beacons that have been submitted as observed by users of the app, and a nice global map of where they all are. So check it out, it's cool. And Locate for iBeacon is available both on iOS and on Android. And then we also have MacBeacon and ScanBeacon. So MacBeacon gives you a library of beacons that you can turn on and off, that you can actually do your testing with. Believe me, when you are trying to test your behavior of your app on entering or exiting region, what you don't want to have to do is walk 100 feet away with a beacon to see how it goes. That doesn't scale in terms of your time. So this is a much better way to do it. And then ScanBeacon is kind of the opposite. It's sort of like Wireshark for beacons. So it will look for all the beacons around you, and then we'll show them to you on a desktop display as well. All right, so how do you get beacons? Well, there are lots of manufacturers of beacons, and I didn't come here to give them ads, but we work with anybody's beacons, but we are actually pretty excited about our beacons. And the first is something called RadBeacon USB, and that is a USB-powered beacon. It's a complete standalone beacon, and it just takes USB power, right? And that's a hugely successful device, especially if you think about real-world deployments and being able to stick them in the side of a digital sign or in the back of a point-of-sale system or inside an ATM or inside of a gas fuel dispenser. Lots of USB ports out there. And by leveraging USB power, the whole issue of who manages that battery when it dies, who goes out there and replaces it, that problem goes away. So for your large-scale, big brand customers, that's where they see their cost. It's not in the price of the beacon. It's in the price of how do I, when it fails, who do I send? How do I send? How do I manage that? Right? If you're McDonald's with 35,000 stores and you're going to put 3 beacons in each store, that's over 100,000 beacons. That freaks them out. So this makes that problem go away. And then the next one is Rad Beacon Tag. And this is a small coin cell powered beacon. And these have a lifetime of about 30 days. And we just used 60 of them last week in London at the Adobe Live Summit. So Adobe's a customer of ours, and they fielded these. And they're great for short-term events. Or if you're in a situation where changing a battery out every month isn't a problem, that's great for that as well. Okay. All right, so what are some cool things that we can do with this stuff? So one point I tried to get across is this is not just about pushing coupons and offers to people. That's where you hear everybody talk about iBeacon. It's going to be iBeacon in the store, yay, whatever. That's great. We love that business, okay? And so, yeah, we can reward customers by automatically give them loyalty points from coming to the store. We can give them special offers. We can offer them alternative ways to pay. We can give them alternative ways to request assistance, right? So that's all great. But there are also other cool things that are going on. So what about at a museum, where we can personalize the experience, not only give them more information, but so we have beacons out at National Geographic Museum. The things that they're excited about is that content is kind of adult-oriented, right? So what about the kid? If we can present on a personal screen they're carrying something with a cartoon character, somebody's presenting the information in a way that's more tuned to them. I mean, really tuning the user experience, understanding their age level. A 6-year-old is a lot different than an 11-year-old, which is a lot different than a 32-year-old. So tuning that experience for them. In the classroom, especially at big conferences, all these conferences have these big apps, and they have all the relevant material for the breakout session, kind of like what we're doing right now, but no one can ever find it while they're at the session. So what about just fast pathing to the set of PDFs for this particular breakout, if that material is available, or that in a standard classroom? At the stadium and Verizon Center, right now we're doing in-seat upgrades. So if you're at you're not in a premium seating area, but there are some inventory there available, how about instead of you sneaking down to see if you can get courtside, what about just for 20 bucks? Come on down. So we're doing that today at Verizon Center. On the train, you ever see anybody freak out as the conductor comes up to them and trying to find their electronic ticket and they're having a spasmodic episode, right? So what if we just bring that up for them? In the airport, this is an app that somebody just put together last week, and they stuck one of those white rad beacons in their luggage tag. Actually, not only did they get notified when it came out of the carousel, what they were excited about is when they got on the plane, they got a notification when their bag got put in the plane, which was really exciting. And how about at the hotel? How about if the experience isn't something that's happening on the phone, but what if the phone is just sending a message to the CRM system at the hotel, and so that you actually get greeted as you pull into the driveway, and then personally escorted past all the riffraff and straight up to whatever, right? That's what they're planning at Caesars, right? Oh, we're going to walk you, sir, right up to the Nobu Hotel, and with an iPad do all your registration and look you in the eye and shake your hand. So what about our poor designer, Sean? Well, Sean has now experienced both enlightenment and joy. There's a famous quote from Arthur C. Clarke, science fiction writer: "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." And this stuff feels like magic. So I'm David Helms. I'm from Radius Networks. Let's go make some magic together. And I think we might have a minute or two for questions. So. Yes, sir.
So within an app that has iBeacon enabled, you can search for iBeacons that you're not in that same range of, is that right?
You can, so the question is, within an app that has iBeacon enabled, you can search for iBeacons that you're not in range of. And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, you're kind of searching all the time, whether the app's in the foreground or in the background, or even if it's been terminated, which is the latest feature in iOS 7.1, because in fact, you're never doing the searching. The operating system is doing the searching for you. It's acting kind of as your proxy. And so that allows your app to essentially not consume any power. There's only one single agent, if you will, on the phone that is looking for those beacons, and that's the operating system on iOS. Slightly different on Android right now, since there is no general capability in Android, and so every app has to bring its own. And so in Android, you have the ability to install a service, and so each app would install its own service.
And is there a range
It's really kind of a periodicity. So the iPhone is listening periodically for those signals, and when one is encountered, and then it will notify the app. So an iPhone is constantly looking for iBeacons if at least one app has requested location services for that. Yes?
Can you like privatize an iBeacon? So like with the guy and his luggage, like you don't want everybody like having access.
Right.
Don't know, like is there a way to like just have more like if I were to give one, like if I was going with a family to like Disney World or something,
Right.
and we were trying to reconvene, could you?
So I think the question is, are those advertisements, can you privatize them anyway? Can you make them confidential? And today the answer is no. The iBeacon specification and the way Apple has implemented it, which is sort of the least common denominator we all have to play with, is that information is all transmitted in the clear. There are some implementations where vendors are talking about creating rotating identifiers so that at least you wouldn't, where they could change over time, right? But we're kind of in the early stages of exploring those different options.
How does that work with kids? You know, like you said with kids coming to a museum, with like kids in a store.
Well, the example, so how does it work with kids? I mean, it's all dependent. So, I'm getting the high sign that we need to go, but this is all I had to do today was 30 minutes. I'm around. I'd be happy to answer as many questions as you'd like. All right. Thanks, guys.